Vigilance is what saved this flight. The pilots planned their descent and approach carefully, and the approach briefing was very thorough. During the initial stage of the approach, they confirmed the planned FMC descent profile was being flown on the DME arc by using the 1 in 60 rule. Because it was NOTAM'd unmonitored, the third pilot continuously monitored the ILS ident for any unseen eventualities. They also pre-briefed for the alternative VOR DME approach. The crew were watching and waiting, but when the clues arrived, they needed to decide which information was correct before deciding what course of action was appropriate. Probably the best qualified to comment on this process is the head investigator into this event, Mr. Dave Stobie.
Early on in the investigation, it was obvious that this crew were cautious, diligent and well prepared for the approach. They were aware that they needed to cross-check their various pieces of information, but they had a normal mindset for pilots conducting an ILS. Pilots tend to trust the most precise information. For example, they trust a VOR more than an NDB. They also trust an ILS more than any other approach aid because it allows high precision approaches. So when things didn't feel quite right during the approach, they naturally accepted the most precise information they had, which was the ILS, especially in the absence of any warning flags.
That mindset was difficult to break. The combination of a high workload managing the aircraft energy and the trust in the ILS system that they had all been conditioned to have made it difficult for them to perceive the glide path error. When the captain looked up and didn't see the runway lights, he made the mental picture fit by assuming there was weather in front of him. When they saw a descent of just over 1,000 feet per minute, the crew again made the mental picture fit by assuming the tailwind and heavy weight were the cause of the higher rate of descent. They were presented with normal centerline and glide slope indications on all their instruments. The autopilot had accepted the localizer and glide path guidance signals. There were no immediate clues available to warn them that the information being portrayed on the instruments was, in fact, wrong. The autopilots interrogated all data and found no anomalies with the status of the ILS information and therefore went to Land 3 auto land mode. The Faliolo VOR DME was the only DME not subject to a NOTAM. With the crew using this DME, the conflict of DME distance against the aircraft altitude took some seconds to resolve. The Faliolo VOR DME is 1.5 miles down the runway from the threshold of runway 08. And this required an adjustment of 450 feet to the 300 feet per mile rule to check the distance against required altitude. In the face of a centred glide slope indication, the fact that the distance was anomalous against the actual altitude, combined with the high level of trust pilots all have for the accuracy of the ILS, would have created a potential mental question of what did I do wrong, what error did I make in my calculation. Although they didn't understand precisely what was wrong, the conflict generated for each of them from the distant altitude anomaly and the apparent closeness of the lights on the adjacent island caused them each to break their mindset of the ILS being correct and make a safe decision to go around, establish the aircraft clear of terrain and above safety height, and then examine their options.
When pilots cross-check information, they do so because they are aware of possible errors. Over the years, we have learnt about many of the technical errors which occur, and we are continually improving our understanding of human error. It's easy to accept the most compelling information, in this case the ILS. This is normal human nature. What this event has taught us, yet again, is that we must remain vigilant and always be careful to validate all the information we are presented with. When the crew of NZ60 went around, they did so because their trust in the systems and the aircraft had been violated. Trust is interesting. With the open environment that had been created and the team building that had gone on earlier in the night, the crew felt sufficiently at ease to express their doubts and call the go-around. After their go-around, not only did they have to re-establish trust in their aircraft and in their navigational aids, but they also had to break the mindset of trust in the ILS which had been established over many years of training and line flying. We associate precision with trust, so when the crew had a valid ILS signal but the DME cues were wrong, they tended to trust the ILS at the expense of the DME. We trust our instruments, especially if there are no flags coupled with a valid ident. One way to review the elements of this event is to use Professor James Reason's model, a model that you're all familiar with. The model looks not only at those causal factors which were immediately proximate to the event, the active failures, but also further back into the past to determine the contribution of other, apparently unrelated factors, the latent conditions. Let's look at some of the factors relevant to this event using the Reason model. The first offence was breached by the NOTAM terminology because there is a misunderstanding regarding the potential risk of using unmonitored or not ATS monitored approach and landing aids. The second offence, monitoring the ILS ident, was breached because the ident was present throughout the approach. The third offence, the aircraft warning system design, was breached because the degraded ILS system still provided sufficient electronic information to withdraw all the onboard warning flags. The fourth offence was breached when the glide slope intercept check was not completed. The fifth offence, the warning available from a ground proximity warning system, was breached because the aircraft was correctly configured to land, which met all the requirements of the GPWS system. The sixth offence held. The crew's situation awareness involving the unease generated at the glide slope capture, the increased workload to configure the aircraft, the proximity of the lights on the island, and reinforced by the conflict between the aircraft altitude and DME distance, caused them to execute a go-around and protect the safety of the aircraft. Although the transmission of erroneous ILS information at Apia was caused by an unusual set of circumstances, technicians are routinely required to transmit similar signals during test and maintenance of airfield navigation aids. A similar situation to that faced by the crew of NZ60 could occur to all aircraft types and to any crew during what seems to be a routine instrument approach.